kiss at Logan Airport felt different. Not warmer or colder, just hollow, like she was going through motions she'd rehearsed. Tessa Farrow pressed her lips against mine with the practiced efficiency of someone checking items off a list. Napa with the girls, she said, adjusting the strap of her designer carry-on. Back Sunday evening. I'll text you from the hotel. I watched her walk toward the terminal entrance, her heels clicking against the concrete with that confident rhythm I'd fallen for 15 years ago. She moved like someone who owned every space she entered, and for a long time, I'd admired that quality. Now it just made me tired. Have fun, I called after her, but she was already pulling out her phone, probably texting whoever was really waiting for her. 6 weeks earlier, I'd planted an AirTag in her toiletry bag. Not the main compartment. That would have been amateur hour. I'd sewn it into the fabric lining of a small interior pocket, the kind she used for jewelry when traveling, the kind she never emptied completely. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the gradual accumulation of small lies that had been piling up like snow until the weight became impossible to ignore. Late meetings that didn't appear on her work calendar. New perfume she claimed was a gift from a colleague I'd never heard her mention. Business trips that somehow never generated the usual complaints about hotel food or delayed flights. I sat in my Honda Civic in the departure zone, engine running, watching the tracking app on my phone. The blue dot that represented my wife moved through the terminal at a steady pace. Security checkpoint. Gate area. Then, for 47 minutes, it remained stationary. Flight 447 to San Francisco departed at 2:15 p.m. I'd checked the schedule. Tessa's dot should have gone dark somewhere over the Atlantic as the plane climbed to cruising altitude. Instead, at 3:23 p.m., it started moving again. Not west toward California, south. By 6:30 p.m., the signal had stabilized at coordinates that placed my wife in Miami, Florida. Specifically, at an address in Coral Gables that I'd never heard her mention. I drove home through the familiar streets of our Newton suburb, past the coffee shops and yoga studios and overpriced markets that catered to people like us. Upper-middle-class professionals with good credit scores and carefully maintained lawns, people who solved their problems through lawyers and therapists, not through AirTags and private investigators. But sometimes the conventional approaches weren't enough. Our house looked exactly the same as when I'd left that morning. Colonial style, painted gray with white trim, a small garden that Tessa maintained with the same methodical attention she applied to everything else. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the windows of what had been our shared life. My phone buzzed, a text from Tessa. Flight delayed, but finally in Napa. Hotel is gorgeous. Miss you already. XOXO. The timestamp showed 7:45 p.m. Eastern. According to my tracking app, she was still in Miami. I screenshot both the text and the location data, then forwarded them to Rosie Kellerman, the private investigator I'd hired 3 weeks ago. Rosie specialized in matrimonial cases and had the kind of reputation that made lawyers nervous. Former Boston PD detective, 23 years on the force before starting her own agency. She charged $300 a day plus expenses, and so far she'd been worth every penny. My phone rang within minutes. Well, Rosie said without preamble, that's interesting. Define interesting. Your wife's in Florida, but her social media shows her checking into the Auberge du Soleil in Napa Valley. Either she's mastered by location, or someone else is posting for her. I walked into our kitchen and opened the refrigerator, staring at the contents without really seeing them. What's at the Miami address? Give me an hour. I've got contacts down there who can take a look. Rosie? Yeah? I want to know everything. Who owns the property, who's staying there, how long it's been rented, everything. You sure about that, Wes? Sometimes the truth is messier than people expect. I closed the refrigerator and looked around the kitchen. Tessa's coffee mug still sat in the sink from this morning. Her reading glasses lay folded on the counter next to a stack of pharmaceutical journals, evidence of a life that was apparently more fiction than fact. I'm sure. After Rosie hung up, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Tessa's social media accounts painted a convincing picture of her Napa adventure. Photos of wine country landscapes, carefully staged shots of her supposed hotel room, even a group selfie with her 3 traveling companions, Ava, Jennifer, and Chloe. Except when I looked closely at the metadata, something felt wrong. The photos were too perfect, too carefully composed. And in the group selfie, the lighting on Tessa's face didn't match the lighting on the other women. I opened Photoshop and ran the image through a basic analysis. It took less than 5 minutes to confirm what I'd suspected. Tessa had been digitally inserted into the photo. Someone with decent editing skills had taken a picture of her 3 friends and added her face to create the illusion of a group vacation. The question was why. My phone buzzed with a call from Derek, my younger brother. Derek worked construction and had the kind of straightforward worldview that came from solving problems with tools instead of theories. "Hey, how's the bachelor life treating you?" he asked. "Tessa get off okay?" "She's in Napa," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, that's not true. She's in Miami." "Come again?" I explained about the AirTag, the flight tracking, the social media deception. Derek listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. "So what's your next move?" he asked when I finished. "I wait for Rosie to get back to me. Then I figure out what my wife is really doing in Florida." "You want company? I can drive over." "Thanks, but I'm okay. This is just information gathering at this point." "Wes? Yeah? You know this isn't going to end with her apologizing and promising to do better, right?" I looked around the kitchen again, at the evidence of our shared domestic life, the magnetic calendar on the refrigerator with her handwriting marking important dates, the coffee maker programmed to start at 6:30 a.m. because she couldn't function without caffeine, the small stack of mail addressed to both of us, as if we were still a team. "Yeah," I said. "I know." Rosie called back at 10:30 p.m. with information that made my bourbon taste like medicine. "The Coral Gables address is registered to a shell company called Meridian Holdings, LLC, she said. Property was purchased 14 months ago for $2.3 million, cash transaction. The house is currently occupied, and my contact got some interesting photos. Send them." "Already did. Check your email." I opened my laptop and downloaded the attachments. The first photo showed a Mediterranean-style house with a red tile roof and elaborate landscaping. Pool in the back, 3-car garage, the kind of place that screamed new money and questionable taste. The second photo made my hands shake. Tessa stood on the pool deck in a white bikini I'd never seen before, holding a drink and laughing at something someone off-camera had said. Her hair was shorter than when she'd left Boston that morning. Either she'd gotten a very quick haircut, or this photo was older than it appeared. The third photo answered that question. Same pool deck, same bikini, but this time Tessa wasn't alone. A man in his early 40s stood behind her with his arms around her waist. Tall, expensive haircut, the kind of tan that came from regular golf games and Caribbean vacations. He looked familiar, but I couldn't immediately place him. The fourth photo was a wider shot that included a second couple, another woman, blonde, early 30s, and a second man who looked like he spent serious time in expensive gyms. They were all holding drinks and posing like they were on some kind of group vacation, except I'd never seen any of these people before in my life. "The property records show some interesting connections," Rosie continued. "Meridian Holdings is owned by another shell company, which is owned by a third entity that eventually traces back to a pharmaceutical consulting firm called Apex Strategies." Never heard of it. Neither had I, until I started digging. Apex Strategies has been under FBI investigation for 18 months. Money laundering, cryptocurrency fraud, offshore tax evasion. The kind of white-collar crime that ruins lives without anyone ever getting physically hurt. I stared at the photos on my laptop screen. What does this have to do with Tessa? That's what we need to figure out. But Wes, your wife isn't on vacation. This looks like a business operation. After Rosie hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen and tried to process what I'd learned. Tessa worked in pharmaceutical sales for a company called MedTech Solutions. Legitimate business, good reputation, steady income. She'd been there for 8 years and had never mentioned any connection to Apex Strategies or Meridian Holdings. But then again, there were apparently a lot of things she'd never mentioned. I was about to close the laptop when a new email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. jarnell.temp.accountprotonmail.com. The subject line read, "Your wife and my wife." I opened it. "Mr. Farrow, you don't know me, but I think we have a problem in common. My name is Jace Arnell. My wife is Rhea Morick. She works in pharmaceutical sales and travels frequently for business. Currently, she's supposed to be at a medical conference in Chicago, but I have reason to believe she's actually in Miami, Florida, at the same address where your wife is staying. If you're interested in comparing notes, please reply to this email. We need to talk." I read the message 3 times, then opened a new browser window and searched for Rhea Morick Pharmaceutical Sales. The first result was a LinkedIn profile that matched the blonde woman from the pool photos. According to her profile, she worked for a company called Pinnacle Medical Solutions and specialized in strategic client relationships. I replied to Jace's email, "What makes you think your wife is in Miami?" His response arrived within minutes. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. My wife has been taking unexplained trips for the past year, always with stories that don't quite add up. The PI tracked her to the Coral Gables address. When I saw your wife's name on some documents my investigator found, I decided to reach out." What kind of documents? Cryptocurrency wallet transactions. Your wife and mine have been moving money through the same network. Large amounts. I think they are working together. I poured another bourbon and considered my options. Either Jace Arnell was telling the truth and our wives were involved in some kind of criminal enterprise, or this was an elaborate scam designed to separate me from my money. But the photos didn't lie, and the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. I typed back, "Can you talk on the phone?" "Not from my house. My wife monitors our internet activity. Can you meet me somewhere tomorrow?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory where neither of us had any history. After I sent the confirmation email, I sat back and tried to understand what was happening to my life. 12 hours ago, I'd thought my biggest problem was a cheating wife. Now it looked like I was married to someone involved in federal financial crimes. I opened the photos Rosie had sent and studied them more carefully. The man with his arms around Tessa looked familiar, and after a few minutes, I remembered where I'd seen him. Last year's MedTech Solutions holiday party. He'd been introduced as someone from corporate, visiting from the West Coast office. I searched through my phone until I found the photos Tessa had taken at the party. There he was, standing in a group of executives, holding a drink and smiling at the camera. According to the caption Tessa had written, his name was Evan Cross, Regional Director of Strategic Partnerships. So my wife was in Miami with her boss, another couple I didn't recognize, and enough cryptocurrency transactions to attract FBI attention. The bourbon was starting to taste better. I called Derek back. "Change of plans," I said when he answered. "I think I might need that company after all." The coffee shop in Cambridge buzzed with the usual mix of graduate students and startup entrepreneurs, people who lived on caffeine and ambition in equal measure. I'd chosen a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and ordered black coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. Jace Arnell arrived exactly on time, which told me something about his personality. Mid-40s, wearing a navy blazer over jeans, the kind of careful casual that suggested money but not ostentation. He scanned the room before approaching my table, another sign that he took this meeting seriously. "Wes Farrow," he extended his hand. "Jace Arnell. Thanks for agreeing to meet." "Thanks for reaching out," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "This is either going to be very helpful or very weird." "Probably both." Jace sat down and pulled out a tablet. "I brought copies of everything my investigator found. Fair warning, some of it's going to be hard to look at." He opened a folder on the tablet and turned it toward me. The first document was a bank statement showing transfers from an account in Ria's name to something called Meridian Crypto Services. The amounts were substantial. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. Always in round numbers that suggested they weren't legitimate business expenses. "This goes back 18 months, Jace said. Always timed to her business trips, and always followed by deposits into accounts that I can't trace. I studied the dates. My wife started taking more frequent trips around the same time, always pharmaceutical conferences or client meetings. Same story here, except when I called the hotels where she was supposedly staying, they had no record of her reservations." Jace swiped to the next document, a series of email exchanges between Ria and someone identified only as EC. The messages were carefully worded but clearly referred to moving money and coordinating travel schedules. "EC," I said. "Evan Cross. He's my wife's boss." "That fits. My investigator thinks he's running the operation, using pharmaceutical sales as cover for some kind of money laundering scheme." I pulled out my phone and showed Jace the photos Rosie had sent. This was taken yesterday at the Miami house. Jace's expression darkened as he recognized his wife in the group shot. "How long has this been going on?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out, but I think our wives aren't just having affairs, I think they're business partners." We spent the next hour comparing information. Jace's investigator had been more thorough than mine, probably because he'd been working the case longer. He'd traced the shell companies, identified the cryptocurrency wallets, and even found evidence that the Miami house was being used as a meeting place for multiple couples involved in the scheme. "The FBI is already investigating," Jace said, showing me a news article about Apex Strategies. "Federal agents raided their offices in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago, seized computers, froze accounts, arrested 2 executives." "Does that mean our wives are in danger?" "I think it means they're in trouble. The kind of trouble that comes with federal indictments and asset forfeiture." I thought about our joint bank accounts, our retirement savings, the house we'd bought together. If Tessa was involved in money laundering, everything we owned could be considered criminal proceeds. "There's something else," Jace said, lowering his voice. "My investigator thinks the Miami house is under surveillance. Federal agents are watching who comes and goes. which means they probably have photos of our wives, and probably recordings of their conversations. I finished my coffee and tried to process the implications. If federal agents were building a case against the cryptocurrency network, they would eventually need witnesses, people who could testify about how the scheme worked, who was involved, how the money moved, people like the wives of the conspirators. "What are you thinking?" Jace asked. "I'm thinking we need to talk to lawyers, good ones, the kind who specialize in federal criminal defense." "Already ahead of you." Jace pulled a business card from his wallet. "Patricia Volkov, former federal prosecutor, now in private practice. She represents people in white-collar cases." I took the card. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Ever since my investigator told me about the FBI investigation. Wes, our wives aren't just cheating on us, they're committing federal crimes. And when this comes apart, not if, when, we need to make sure we're on the right side of it." After Jace left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at Patricia Volkov's business card and thinking about the phone call I needed to make. Hiring a criminal defense attorney felt like crossing a line, admitting that my marriage had moved beyond the realm of normal problems into something darker and more complicated. But the alternative was waiting for federal agents to show up at my door with questions I couldn't answer. I called Patricia Volkov's office and made an appointment for the following morning. Then I drove home to wait for Tessa's next lie. She called at 6:30 p.m., just as I was heating up leftover Chinese food. "Hi, honey. How was your day?" "Quiet," I said, putting the phone on speaker while I stirred fried rice. "How's Napa?" "Absolutely gorgeous. We did a wine tasting this afternoon that was incredible. Ava got a little tipsy and started flirting with the sommelier." I opened the tracking app on my phone. Tessa's location showed her still in Miami, specifically at a restaurant called Versailles in Little Havana. "That sounds fun," I said. "What are you doing tonight?" "Early dinner, then back to the hotel. We're all exhausted. Tomorrow we're doing the hot air balloon tour." "Send me some pictures." "Of course. I love you, Wes." "Love you too." After she hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with my reheated dinner and thought about the woman I'd married. Tessa had always been ambitious, always looking for the next opportunity to advance her career or increase our income. I'd admired her drive, even when it meant long hours and frequent travel. But ambition was different from criminality. And the woman on the phone, lying so effortlessly about her location and activities, felt like a stranger. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosie. "Got more intel on the Miami house. Call me when you can." I called immediately. "The good news is that I have a contact in the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office who's been watching the Coral Gables property," Rosie said. "The bad news is that your wife and her friends are definitely involved in something bigger than adultery." "How much bigger?" "Oh, federal task force bigger. DEA, FBI, IRS. They've been building a case against the cryptocurrency network for over a year. The Miami house is what they call a coordination point, a place where the conspirators meet to plan operations and move money." I set down my fork. "Are you telling me my wife is going to be arrested?" "I'm telling you that federal agents are probably going to want to talk to you soon, and when they do, you need to be very careful about what you say." "Why would they want to talk to me?" "Because you're married to someone who's been moving large amounts of money through cryptocurrency wallets. Because your joint bank accounts show transfers that might be connected to the laundering operation. Because from their perspective, you're either a co-conspirator or a potential witness." I thought about Patricia Volkov's business card, still sitting on the kitchen counter. "Rosie, I need you to find out everything you can about Evan Cross. Employment history, financial records, criminal background, everything. Already working on it. But Wes, you might want to think about protecting yourself. If this goes sideways, you don't want to get caught in the crossfire." After Rosie hung up, I walked through the house that Tessa and I had shared for 8 years. The living room with furniture we'd chosen together, the bedroom with photos from our honeymoon, the home office where she worked late into the evening, apparently on projects I knew nothing about. How long had she been living a double life? How long had I been sharing a bed with someone who was committing federal crimes? And what was I going to do about it? Patricia Volkov's law office occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone near Harvard Square, the kind of place that whispered expensive expertise without shouting about it. The receptionist led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Charles River that probably cost extra. Volkov herself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen everything twice. She wore a charcoal gray suit and no jewelry except for a simple watch that looked like it could fund a small country's defense budget. "Mr. Farrow," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her, "tell me about your wife." I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive over, but sitting in the actual chair made everything feel more real. I think she's involved in money laundering, federal crimes, and I think I might be in trouble because of it. Start from the beginning. I told her everything. The AirTag, the Miami house, the cryptocurrency transactions, the FBI investigation. Volkov listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Have you been contacted by federal agents? She asked when I finished. Not yet. Have you participated in any of the financial transactions you described? Not knowingly, but we have joint bank accounts. If she moved money through those accounts, you could be considered a co-conspirator unless you can prove you had no knowledge of the criminal activity. Volkov set down her pen. Mr. Farrow, you're in a difficult position. Your wife has apparently been using your shared financial resources to commit federal crimes. That makes you either a victim or an accomplice. How do I prove I'm a victim? By cooperating with the federal investigation, completely and voluntarily. The word cooperating hung in the air between us like a challenge. You mean testifying against my wife? I mean providing truthful information to federal investigators about what you know and when you learned it. If your wife is guilty of money laundering, your cooperation won't change that, but it might protect you from being charged as an accessory. Volkov opened a folder and pulled out several documents. I've handled cases like this before. Federal prosecutors are usually more interested in the organizers of criminal schemes than in the family members who were kept in the dark. But they need evidence, and they need witnesses. What happens to Tessa? That depends on what she's done and how much evidence the government has. Money laundering carries serious penalties. If she's been moving hundreds of thousands of dollars through cryptocurrency networks, she's looking at significant prison time. I stared out the window at the river, watching scullers navigate the morning current. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was whether we should refinance the mortgage. Mr. Farrow, I need to ask you something directly. Do you want to protect your wife, or do you want to protect yourself? The question was harsher than I'd expected, but probably necessary. Can I do both? Not if she's guilty of federal crimes. At some point, you'll have to choose between your loyalty to her and your own legal safety. Volkov's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Excuse me for a moment. This might be relevant. She answered the call and listened for several minutes, asking occasional questions that I couldn't quite follow. When she hung up, her expression had changed. That was a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office, she said. Federal agents executed search warrants this morning at multiple locations connected to the Apex Strategies investigation, including the Coral Gables house where your wife is staying. My stomach dropped. Was she arrested? I don't know yet. But Mr. Farrow, if federal agents have seized evidence from that house, they probably have recordings of conversations, financial documents, and other materials that will be used in prosecutions. Which means the government's case is moving forward quickly, and anyone who wants to cooperate needs to do it soon, before the prosecutors decide they have enough evidence to proceed without additional witnesses. Volkov pulled out another document. This is a proffer agreement. It would allow you to meet with federal prosecutors and provide information about what you know, with limited immunity for your statements. If they are interested in your cooperation, they would then offer you a formal immunity deal. I read through the document, trying to understand the legal language. What happens if I sign this and they decide I'm not useful as a witness? Then you go back to your normal life, and you're not charged with any crimes related to your wife's activities. But Mr. Farrow, if you don't cooperate and they later find evidence that you knew about the money laundering, I could be charged as a co-conspirator. Exactly. My phone rang. Tessa's name appeared on the screen. Should I answer it? I asked. Volkov nodded. But be very careful what you say, and put it on speaker. I answered the call. Hi, honey. Wes, something terrible has happened. Tessa's voice was strained, higher pitched than normal. Some men came to the house this morning. They said they were federal agents. They had a warrant. What kind of warrant? A search warrant. They took computers, phones, documents, everything, and they arrested Evan. I looked at Volkov, who was taking notes rapidly. Are you okay? Were you hurt? No, I'm fine. But Wes, I'm scared. They asked me questions about money, about cryptocurrency. I don't understand what's happening. Where are you now? At the police station. They said I'm not under arrest, but they want to talk to me. They said I should call a lawyer. That's good advice. Wes, I need you to know that I never meant for this to happen. I got involved in something that I thought was legitimate business, but it turned out to be more complicated than I understood. Volkov was writing furiously, underlining certain phrases. She held up a note. Don't give her legal advice. Tessa, You should definitely talk to a lawyer before you say anything else to the federal agents. I know. But Wes, I need to tell you something. The house, the trips, the money, I've been lying to you. About everything. I'm so sorry. We can talk about this when you get home. I don't know when that will be. The agent said I might need to stay in Florida for a few days while they continue their investigation. After Tessa hung up, Volkov and I sat in silence for several minutes. Your wife just admitted to lying about money and being involved in something she now claims was more complicated than she understood, Volkov said finally. That conversation will probably be used as evidence if she's prosecuted. Should I have warned her not to say anything? You're not her lawyer. And frankly, Mr. Farrow, your interests and her interests are no longer aligned. Volkov pulled out the proffer agreement again. The federal agents are going to want to talk to you soon, probably within the next few days. You can wait for them to contact you, or you can contact them first through this agreement. What's the advantage of contacting them first? It shows good faith. It demonstrates that you're willing to cooperate voluntarily rather than waiting to be compelled, and it might give you more leverage in negotiating an immunity deal. I thought about Tessa sitting in a police station in Miami, talking to federal agents without a lawyer. I thought about the joint bank accounts, and the house, and the life we'd built together. And I thought about Jace Arnell's warning. When this comes apart, we need to make sure we're on the right side of it. If I sign this agreement, how quickly can you arrange a meeting? Probably within 48 hours. I picked up the pen. Let's do it. The call came at 4:17 a.m. on Thursday morning, 4 days after Tessa had left for her fictional wine country vacation. I was awake anyway, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and a laptop full of financial documents that Volkov had asked me to organize. Some man came by, Tessa said without preamble. Her voice carried the kind of exhaustion that comes from too much stress and too little sleep. Says he's your lawyer. What's going on? I'd been rehearsing this conversation for 2 days, but hearing her actual voice made it harder than I'd expected. Relax. It's just the separation. Separation? Wes, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've been lying to me for over a year. I'm talking about the money laundering and the cryptocurrency and the federal investigation. I'm talking about the fact that you're in Miami with your boss instead of Napa with your friends. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, how did you? AirTag in your makeup bag. Planted it 6 weeks ago when I started suspecting you were having an affair. Turns out adultery was the least of our problems. Wes, I can explain? No, you can't. Because whatever explanation you give me now is going to be another lie, and I'm done with lies. I could hear voices in the background, probably Rhea and Evan discussing their own legal problems. The federal raid on the Miami house had been thorough, according to news reports. Computers seized, documents confiscated, multiple arrests. Where are you staying? Tessa asked. In our house, where I've been staying while you've been committing federal crimes in Florida. I need to come home. We need to talk about this. The locks have been changed. Your belongings are in storage. The address is in the paperwork my attorney served you. Another silence, longer this time. You can't just throw me out of my own house. Actually, I can. The house is in my name. We never got around to adding you to the deed, remember? You said it wasn't necessary because we trusted each other. That particular irony had occurred to me several times over the past few days. When we'd bought the house 8 years ago, Tessa had been between jobs and her credit score had been lower than mine. The mortgage application had been easier with just my name on it, and we talked about changing the deed later. We'd never gotten around to it. Wes, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Mistakes? I opened my laptop and looked at the financial records Volkov's forensic accountant had compiled. You moved $890,000 through cryptocurrency wallets connected to a money laundering operation. You sold our vacation cabin without telling me and converted the proceeds to Bitcoin. You've been traveling to Miami for over a year to coordinate with other conspirators in a federal criminal enterprise. Those aren't mistakes, Tessa. That's a career. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now federal prosecutors want to talk to me about whether I was involved in your criminal activities. Were you? The question came out sharper than she'd probably intended. No, Tessa. I wasn't involved because you never told me about any of it, which is probably the only reason I'm not facing federal charges myself. I could hear her crying now, but it didn't move me the way it would have 6 months ago. Too much had happened. Too many lies had been exposed. What happens now? She asked. Now you get a lawyer and you figure out how to deal with the federal prosecutors, and I protect myself and our remaining assets from whatever legal consequences you're facing. Our assets? The accounts you haven't already looted for your cryptocurrency adventures. I froze everything yesterday. Your credit cards, the joint checking account, the investment portfolio, all of it. You can't do that. Already did. My attorney filed an emergency motion to protect marital assets from criminal forfeiture. The judge signed it this morning. Tessa was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less pleading, more calculating. Wes, if you're planning to cooperate with the federal investigation, you need to be very careful. There are people involved in this who don't like witnesses. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Evan isn't the only person involved in this operation. There are others, and they have a lot more to lose than just money. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you got involved with them. Maybe I should have, but it's too late for that now. After Tessa hung up, I sat in the kitchen and tried to process the conversation. The woman I'd married had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who could move hundreds of thousands of dollars through criminal networks and then warn me about dangerous associates when she got caught. My phone rang again, Derek this time. How did it go? He asked. About as well as expected. She's surprised, angry, and apparently worried about dangerous people who don't like witnesses. Do you think she's trying to scare you? I think she's trying to protect herself, and I think she's realizing that her legal problems are bigger than she wants to admit. What's your next move? I meet with federal prosecutors tomorrow morning. Volkov thinks they'll offer me immunity in exchange for testimony about the financial transactions. And you're going to take it? I looked around the kitchen, at the house I'd worked for 15 years to afford, at the life I'd built with someone who'd been lying to me for over a year. Yeah, I said. I'm going to take it. The meeting with federal prosecutors took place in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office in downtown Boston. Present were Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, FBI Special Agent Michael Torres, and an IRS investigator named David Chen, who looked like he could calculate tax penalties in his sleep. Volkov had prepared me for their questions, but sitting across from federal law enforcement officers still felt surreal. 6 months ago, I'd been a happily married IT consultant whose biggest legal concern was whether I could deduct my home office expenses. Mr. Farrow, Ada Walsh began, we appreciate your willingness to cooperate with our investigation. Before we begin, I want to make sure you understand that anything you tell us today can be used in criminal prosecutions. I understand? Good. Let's start with your wife's travel patterns. When did you first notice changes in her business trips? I told them about the increased frequency of Tessa's travel, the inconsistencies in her stories, the hotels that had no record of her reservations. Agent Torres took detailed notes while Chen pulled up financial records on his laptop. Did your wife ever discuss her work with Apex Strategies or Meridian Holdings? Walsh asked. Never. I'd never heard of either company until my private investigator found the connection. What about cryptocurrency? Did she ever mention Bitcoin or other digital currencies? Only in general terms. She said some of her clients were interested in blockchain technology for pharmaceutical supply chain management. Chen looked up from his laptop. Mr. Farrow, we've traced over $1.2 million in cryptocurrency transactions connected to your wife's activities. Were you aware that she had access to that kind of money? No, our joint accounts never showed balances that high. That's because she was using separate accounts, Walsh said, sliding a document across the table. Accounts that were opened using your social security number and forged signatures. I stared at the bank statements. My name was on the accounts, but I'd never seen them before. The balances showed regular deposits and transfers, all connected to the cryptocurrency network. She committed identity theft, I said. Among other crimes, Agent Torres confirmed. Mr. Farrow, your wife wasn't just moving money for other people. She was recruiting new participants in the laundering operation, using your identity to open accounts, using your home address to receive documents, using your credit history to establish credibility. Which means that, from the outside, it looks like you were involved, Walsh added. Unless we can prove otherwise. Volkov leaned forward. Which is why my client is here voluntarily, providing complete cooperation. We appreciate that, Walsh said. Mr. Farrow, if you're willing to testify about what you've told us today, we're prepared to offer you immunity from prosecution for any crimes related to your wife's money laundering activities. I looked at the immunity agreement Walsh slid across the table. Legal language that would protect me from federal charges in exchange for truthful testimony against Tessa. What happens to her? I asked. That depends on whether she decides to cooperate or fight the charges, Walsh said. But Mr. Farrow, based on the evidence we've collected, your wife is facing significant prison time. I signed the immunity agreement. 2 hours later, I walked out of the federal building into bright afternoon sunshine. Boston looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. I was no longer a suspect in a federal investigation, I was a witness. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. I heard about your meeting with the prosecutors. I hope you're happy. I deleted the message without responding and drove home to the house that was now legally, officially, and completely mine. 6 months later, I sat in the same kitchen where this story had begun, reading the final sentencing memo in United States versus Tessa Farrow. The federal judge had been thorough. 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, complete forfeiture of assets connected to the money laundering operation, and restitution payments that would take decades to complete. Tessa had eventually decided to cooperate with prosecutors, but too late to earn the kind of deal that might have made a meaningful difference. By the time she'd agreed to testify against Evan Cross and the other conspirators, the government had already built their case using evidence from the Miami house and testimony from witnesses like me. Evan had received 7 years. Rhea Morick, 18 months. The cryptocurrency network had been dismantled, the accounts frozen, the shell companies dissolved. The Coral Gables house had sold at federal auction for $1.8 million. I hadn't checked the final price until I'd read about it in the newspaper. Derek knocked on the back door and let himself in, carrying a 6-pack of beer and a bag of Chinese takeout. Figured you might want company tonight? Thanks. I cleared space on the table for the food containers. How was work? Same as always. Built things, fixed things, came home tired. Derek opened 2 beers and handed me one. You hear from Tessa lately? Christmas card from federal prison. Very festive. You going to write back? No. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Derek had been coming by for dinner once a week since the trial ended, never making a big deal about it, just showing up with food and staying long enough to make sure I wasn't completely isolated. You know what's weird? I said, opening a container of lo mein. I don't miss her. That's not weird. That's healthy. I thought I would. Even after everything she did, I thought there would be some part of me that missed the person I thought she was. But there wasn't really a person to miss, Derek said. The woman you married, the one you lived with for 15 years, that was mostly an act. You can't miss someone who never really existed. I'd been thinking about that a lot lately. How much of my marriage had been real, and how much had been performance. Tessa had been playing a role for so long that maybe she'd forgotten who she actually was underneath it. Rosie called yesterday, I said. She's closing her file on the case. Everything wrapped up? Everything we're going to find. The house is mine. The remaining assets are mine. The debts are settled. I'm officially a single man with a clean credit report and no federal criminal liability. Congratulations? Thanks, I think. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something about the timing made me look. Mr. Farrow, this is Jace Arnell. Rhea was released from federal prison last week. She's been trying to contact you. I thought you should know. I showed the message to Derek. What do you think she wants? Nothing good? People don't usually contact their ex-husband's co-conspirator's husband unless they want something. She's not my ex-husband's co-conspirator's husband. She's my ex-wife's co-conspirator. You know what I mean. I deleted the message without responding. Whatever Rhea Morick wanted to discuss, it wasn't something I needed to hear. That part of my life was over, filed away in federal court records and newspaper archives. You ever think about dating again? Derek asked. Sometimes. But it's hard to imagine trusting someone enough to share financial information with them. Not everyone is a money laundering federal criminal. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I'm going to need some time. Derek finished his beer and opened another one. What about work? You thinking about expanding the consulting business? Maybe. I've got more time now that I'm not married to someone who requires federal investigation. Silver lining. Something like that. After Derek left, I walked through the house that was now completely mine. The mortgage was paid off, one of the few benefits of having assets frozen and then released by federal court order. The rooms felt different without Tessa's belongings, less cluttered, but also less lived in. I'd kept the AirTag, the one I'd sewn into her makeup bag. It sat in a kitchen drawer next to the spare keys and takeout menus, a small piece of technology that had changed everything. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd never planted it, if I'd just accepted her lies and continued living in ignorance. But that was a different story, and probably not a better one. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Patricia Volkov, sending me the final invoice for her legal services. The bill was substantial, but fair, and worth every penny for keeping me out of federal prison. I paid it immediately and closed the laptop. Outside, Newton was settling into another quiet suburban evening. Neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bicycles, the ordinary domestic rhythms of people whose biggest secrets involved hidden purchases and forgotten anniversaries. I poured myself a bourbon and sat on the back deck, looking at the garden that Tessa had maintained with such methodical attention. The plants were still there, but I'd hired a landscaping service to handle the maintenance. I wasn't ready to dig in that particular dirt yet. My phone rang. Unknown number, probably spam. I answered anyway. Hello? Wes, it's Tessa. I should have hung up immediately, but something in her voice made me pause. You're not supposed to contact me directly, I said. All communication is supposed to go through lawyers. I know, but I'm calling from a friend's phone and I'll only take a minute. What do you want? I want you to know that I'm sorry, for all of it. The lying, the money, the federal crimes. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. I sipped my bourbon and watched a neighbor's cat stalking something in the bushes. Okay, you've said it. Wes, I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you, Tessa. I don't feel anything about you at all anymore, which is probably worse. I deserve that. Yeah, you do. Are you okay? Financially, I mean? I'm fine. The house is paid off, the accounts are clean, the business is growing. Turns out I don't need a criminal wife to be successful. I'm glad. I know that probably sounds strange, but I'm glad you're okay. Tessa? Yes? Don't call me again. Whatever guilt you're trying to work through, whatever closure you think you need, find it somewhere else. I'm done being part of your story. I hung up and blocked the number. The bourbon was good, smooth and warm, in a way that reminded me of better times. Times before AirTags and federal investigations and immunity agreements. Times when the biggest decision I had to make was what to watch on Netflix. But those times were gone, and I was okay with that. The man who had been married to Tessa Farrow had been naive, trusting, and ultimately foolish. The man sitting on this deck with a glass of bourbon and a paid-off house was wiser, more careful, and completely free. I raised the glass in a toast to no one in particular. Here's to the truth, I said to the empty yard, however much it hurts. The sun set behind the trees, and I went inside to start another evening in a life that was finally completely my own.